Good afternoon, and welcome to the Improving Undergraduate STEM Education, Education and Human Resources Program webinar. This particular webinar will focus on the institutional and community transformation track of the IUSE program. We have two presenters from the National Science Foundation. My name is Ellen Carpenter, and I'm a program director in the Division of Undergraduate Education at the National Science Foundation, and I'm joined by my colleague, Andrea Nixon.
Hello, I'm Andrea Nixon. I too am a program director at the National Science Foundation.
So today's session will be recorded, and for those of you who do not want to take notes extensively on the session, please be aware that we will post an archive of the entire session on the AAAS website. It usually takes a couple of days for the recording to be finalized, but the website or the webinar will be posted as soon as it's ready. So you have the opportunity to go back and review any information that you hear today. In addition, by participating in the session, you are giving us permission to record your questions and comments, and we'll be using the question box to ask questions throughout the course of the webinar. The question that I have for you is, what would you like to do? And I'd like you to think about this a little bit as we go through the webinar today. Would you like to improve students' performance and retention in STEM courses and majors? Would you like to increase the participation of women and students from underrepresented groups in STEM courses and majors? Would you like to help prepare students to enter the STEM workforce? Would you like to increase faculty engagement with STEM teaching? How about making your institution a better place for STEM teaching and learning? Well, all of these things are opportunities for support through the IUSE program, and we hope that you'll stay tuned throughout the extent of this webinar to learn more about the program. We're going to do several things today. We will initially provide an introduction to the program as a whole and give you some idea of the program organization. We have several themes and several tracks within the program. And then we're going to focus very specifically on one of the tracks in the program, the Institutional and Community Transformation track. This is a track that aims to deal with systemic change at the institutional and community level, and it includes a necessity for incorporating a theory of change into the proposal. The track features several different levels. They are the capacity building, level 1, and level 2, and we'll explain what all of those levels mean as we go through the course of the webinar. And at the end of the webinar, we'll provide you with a set of resources that might be helpful as you think about constructing and submitting a proposal to the National Science Foundation. So by way of introduction, the IUSE program hopes to do several things. It hopes to improve the quality and effectiveness of education of undergraduates in all STEM fields, and also to improve the teaching and learning of STEM for all students and/or the institutional environment where they occur. So it's a very broad program with some very broad goals. Proposals may be accepted from all types of institution of higher education, as well as from professional societies and other organizations that work with or represent those institutions. There's no limit on who can qualify to submit a proposal, except through an institutional limit imposed by your own institution. If we look over the last couple of years of IUSE funding, we have funded a number of different types of institutions and organizations. The funding has gone to public and private institutions of higher education. Those can be both universities that include undergraduate and graduate degrees, as well as primarily undergraduate institutions. We've also funded some nonprofit organizations and some business and industry groups as well. However, all of the awards have been focused on improving STEM education at the undergraduate level. For the institutions that we've funded, they vary in the types of degrees that they offer. A large number of them offer the doctorate degree as the highest degree, but they'll also offer master's and undergraduate degrees as well. A number of institutions stop at the master's degree, and we also have funded institutions that provide only an associate's or a bachelor's degree, in addition to several types of organizations that are non-degree granting, and examples of that might be professional societies. Another question that I have for you is, what do you want to do? And so I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to just think about some ideas that you might have for the IUSE program. So I'd like you to really think about what you've been longing to do to improve undergraduate STEM education. So I'll give you about 2 minutes to write down 3 things that you've been wanting to do, and to review these ideas, to think about the one that is perhaps most compelling to you. For those of you who've already started working on an IUSE proposal, you might want to just bring up your proposal outline and take a brief look at it to refresh your memory. But think about what it would take to implement your ideas. Would it take money? Would it take people? Would it take collaborators? And I would like for you really to keep this idea in mind as a possible thing to target as we go through today's presentation. So I'll give you about 2 minutes, and I'll see you on the other side. I'll give you just a couple more seconds to think about your idea. Okay, so hopefully you've got a great idea in mind, and what we would like to do for the rest of this webinar is to help you figure out how to execute that particular idea. So the IUSE program is organized into 2 main tracks. We have one track that is called Engaged Student Learning that focuses directly on students and their outcomes in STEM education. And we have a second track called the Institutional and Community Transformation track that focuses more on a systemic level and attempts to improve institutions more broadly. Within each of those tracks, we have several different levels of funding and several different deadlines that apply to the program. The Engaged Student Learning track really focuses on the development, testing, and use of teaching practices and curricular innovations that can engage students and help to improve their learning, their persistence, their retention, and their graduation in STEM. Whereas the Institutional and Community Transformation track seeks to transform colleges and universities to implement and sustain highly effective STEM teaching and learning. The Engaged Student Learning track focuses on improving student learning, and this can be either a direct focus on the students themselves or indirectly through a number of different avenues, such as faculty professional development, curricular improvements, and other things like that would ultimately lead to improving the student's outcome. The Engaged Student Learning track supports the development of improved instructional materials or methods, and this can include application of new technologies to STEM education, and it aims to engage students, improve their learning, and to increase retention and hopefully graduation in STEM. A number of different approaches could be considered within this track, and the list that I'm presenting here is not meant to be exhaustive, but it might give you an idea of the types of things that could be approached if you were to put a proposal into this particular track. And these things include the development and implementation of novel instructional materials and technologies, the design and assessment of metrics to measure STEM teaching and learning or student outcomes. It can include faculty learning through professional development. It can include discipline-based or interdisciplinary educational research. Projects in this track can think about re-envisioning or adaptation of learning environments to different purposes and different ideas. And projects in this track can also focus on co-curricular activities to increase student motivation and persistence in STEM. Some projects may feature a synthesis or meta-analysis of prior work to gather evidence-based practices or lessons learned from prior activities. And we also hope that some of our projects will be collaborations between 2- and 4-year institutions to help develop innovative pathways for transfer and for student success. The target populations for these particular projects are undergraduate students at 2-year or 4-year institutions of higher education. Some of the students may be STEM majors, and these can either be declared majors or those at the beginning of their career who have yet to declare a major. It can also be students whose course of study requires solid skills and knowledge of STEM principles, regardless of their major. We also seek to fund work that supports non-STEM majors who are seeking to fulfill a general education requirement in STEM. So those students taking introductory courses that would be very broad are still engaging in STEM content and might be a target of an engaged student learning proposal. Some of our proposals directly target STEM faculty members, again through curricular development activities and faculty professional development. And one particular focus is on pre-service STEM teachers who are enrolled in undergraduate teacher preparation programs.
The institutional and community transformation track is the partner track to engage student learning. The ICT track focuses on improving evidence-based instruction by academic departments, institutions, and other organizations or communities. It's also designed to support efforts to build and understand systemic change in undergraduate STEM education. And it aims to use appropriate theories of change to transform institutions. We'll talk about those momentarily. There are a range of examples, and of course, when any program officer gives examples, they don't mean these as being prescriptive, but just exemplary. ICT projects might support the transformation of high enrollment classes to include evidence-based teaching practices, developing teaching evaluation rubrics rooted in research-based frameworks, the development of faculty communities, learning communities to improve accessibility or sustainability of evidence-based practices, identifying best practices to guide institutional transformation, the inclusion of non-tenure track faculty or instructors through policy or professional development, and the identification of common elements across disciplines, programs, institutions, or systems that support students from underrepresented groups to be successful in STEM. So with this initial introduction to the program, we're going to pause briefly, and if you have any questions, feel free to enter them. We'll pause for a moment to see if any questions come in. No? Okay. So now we're going to go in a little more depth into the institutional and community transformation track. Just to contextualize this, a number of fields of study as diverse as ecology, sociology, and education use these three categories of macro, meso, and micro to describe scales or units of analysis. You may have seen Dr. Prudence Carter's Brown lecture, AERA Brown lecture last year that centered on these. The IUSE program's overarching program goals are to improve the quality and effectiveness of undergraduate education in all STEM fields and to enable the NSF to lead national progress towards a diverse and innovative workforce and STEM literate public. For the purposes of our discussion today, consider the IUSE program goals as the macro or national level here. The ICT projects that we fund tend to focus on the meso level insofar as they may focus on academic departments, institutions, and other organizations or communities. And then to round out the description, work at the micro level might focus on outcomes at the level of individual students, faculty members, or courses. Particularly if you're new to the work at this meso level, theories of change may help you situate your project and identify elements that you might want to account for to ensure that your project is successful. And we'll talk a lot more about these as the session unfolds. So the institutional and community transformation track and proposals to this track need to describe a theory of change. It's important that they draw on research literature and theoretical perspectives concerning change. That is, what does the literature say about change and how that manifests in higher education institutions? And in part, this is important because higher education, institutions of higher education are complex systems. If you think about the decision-making processes as they relate to changes in the curriculum and the development of the curriculum, they can be complicated indeed. So it's important that projects take these factors into account. That may involve projects identifying teams of faculty members that would be involved, support from the academic chairs, college deans, or others within the institution's academic leadership, or support from provosts or presidents. So work that's funded through the ICT track quite often spans multiple organizational units, and it's important to keep that in mind, and we'll come back to this. So a theory of change functions to identify and organize the dimensions of a proposed work. While the proposed projects will vary in approach and the underlying theory or theories of change identified, promising proposals, this italicized text is from the solicitation, will recognize that STEM higher education is a complex system and that achieving goals involves analyzing and addressing organizational factors such as institutional policies and practices or opportunities for professional growth. One of the papers that's cited in the current solicitation is by Connolly and Seymour, which identifies that theories of change can drive programs as well as people. A program seeking to affect change or reform often tacitly reflects the theories of change of the program's designers. Because reformers tend to jump from identifying a problem to choosing ways of ameliorating that problem, they often do not articulate the reasons why those strategies will achieve the desired changes. That is, the program's theory of change. Theories of change matter because they are usually implicit in what remains unseen cannot be questioned. So theories of change are intended to help you account for the mechanisms that are implied. So there are a number of theories of change that may be useful. You may have people, for example, in the social sciences at your home institutions that are expert in these. One text that's often referred to that is not STEM specific is Bowman and Deal's Reframing Organizations. Here, this is a text that is often used in professional development programs for people who are becoming chairs or presidents or administrators. This this identifies literature that looks to the structural frame, that is kind of the hierarchy or organizational factors within institutions, the human resource frame, political frame or the cultural or symbolic frame. But there's some literature that's also STEM specific that we're going to point to momentarily. So going back to the ICT, to the prior slide, it's these theories of change and the research literature around them that can help inform and help you, your projects, help you identify elements of that you need to account for your program or your project to be successful. I want to spend a moment as a sidebar to help you give you some guidelines or some pointers about searching for prior funded ICT projects. If you go to the NSF site and look at the awards, it's possible to search for prior awards. One effective strategy is to, as you would guess, look for the phrase institutional and community transformation. This is in quotation marks. Another thing that might be helpful for you to know is the program element code. I'll repeat this a little bit later as well, is 1998, 1998. And that can help you identify proposals that were funded through the IUSE program. Apologies for the small text. I would encourage you as well, when you're looking at your search results, to look for awards that were made through the Directorate for Education and Human Resources. And this is a way of pulling out the text that will enable you to identify the prior awards. So let's have a little exercise here, and I see that some of you are submitting questions, and that's fabulous. What other search terms might you use to identify ICT awards from prior years? So if you could click the red Ask a Button or Ask a Question button and submit, we'll just pause momentarily to see what suggestions you have for search terms. Gender was one. Some others might be, well, the search term that I mentioned, the program element code, 1998. If there are specific authors, okay, some more coming in, theory of change, race and gender, STEM faculty change, change in higher education, okay, theories of change, faculty development, great, institutional transformation, good, STEM education transformation, systems thinking, okay, good, these are good, informal science learning, thank you, okay. So those are a series of good suggestions. Okay, thank you for submitting the, oh, looks like there's a few more. Inclusive teaching and learning, and again, STEM systemic change. Thank you very much. So the ICT awards, let me also say, in the past 2 cycles have used that specific phrase in the abstracts. When you are doing these searches, you are going to, the results will be the titles and the abstracts of prior awards. And we're, in the past couple of competitions, in the past couple of years, we have used that specific string, institutional and community transformation in the abstracts. I would encourage you to use some of these other search terms to make sure that you're identifying ICT awards that were made in prior years. So that will be important. So I'm going to give a couple of suggestions here, three, of sample awards is really what I mean to say. And they are illustrative of different levels of the kind of ICT work, both in terms of the levels we identify, level 1 and level 2 within the program itself, but also thinking along the micro, meso levels. So the first example that I wanted to draw your attention to is titled Testing a Model for Transforming STEM General Education at Liberal Arts Schools. The numeric string following that is the award number. The first two digits of an award number for an NSF award are indicative of the fiscal year in which an award came in. So this was funded in the 2016 fiscal year, and Jacqueline Roberts from DePauw University was the principal investigator. So this project's goal was to test an integrated bottom-up, top-down model of institutional reform within liberal arts college STEM division. The strategy was to provide momentum to fuel transition from an active mobilization stage of this faculty-driven initiative to subsequent stages, that is implementation and institutionalization. The initial grassroots efforts led to base level support for division-wide engagement of the goal. And this model of change is focused on moving the STEM faculty towards significant course transformation, reflective of the growing evidence base indicating what works while simultaneously developing productive STEM learning community. Also from the abstract, it said that this would be accomplished partly through curriculum reform awards, so awards at DePauw University that were funded by the NSF award that would be made to individuals or faculty teams to redesign their courses or to develop new team-taught interdisciplinary courses. Linked to the awards are best practices pedagogical workshops that also engage interdisciplinary faculty teams from other institutions. So this work cited scholarship in this area by Ann Austin, a paper promoting evidence-based change in the undergraduate science education, and Elrod and Kazar's work facilitating interdisciplinary learning, lessons learned from Project Kaleidoscope. These two papers are examples of a series of change, a literature that is cited as a theory of change that is STEM specific. It's also commonplace, but not required, to cite a minimum of one, but perhaps more than one, to help account for multiple aspects of a particular project. I would describe this award as an example of work at a single institution, so also at the micro level, going into the, relating it to the nested structure that I mentioned earlier. A second award is perhaps is indicative of a level 2 project. This was an award given to a collaborative effort led by the Council on Undergraduate Research. But it involved an educational researcher, Jillian Kinsey, as well as a team of individuals that had worked had done work that was focused on undergraduate research that was facilitated through the Council of Undergraduate Research, CUR. This project is designed to achieve cohesive curriculum that initiates students into a cultural inquiry and research in the discipline. Departments will use a backward design approach to develop scaffolded, research-rich courses and assignments that would build in deliberate ways to guide students to greater independence and ownership of learning. This project focused on chemistry, physics, psychology, and a fourth discipline, and had two overarching research questions. What effect do student characteristics, i.e. pre-existing academic preparation and current course performance, have on student learning experiences and outcomes in a scaffolded, inquiry-driven curriculum? And how do different departmental approaches and distinct disciplinary cultures impact integration of these components and outcomes of undergraduate research into the curriculum? So the first question is looking at the educational outcomes. The second question here was focused on the process of change as it unfolds at the participating institutions. The project was rooted in a mixed methods approach to conducting research, where they were addressing the prior research questions. And you can see that they were employing surveys, focus groups. Sorry, there's a pause in the slides. Go back a slide. Faculty observations and interviews. The project was designed to create experimental items for the National Survey of Student Engagement, the NSF, and the Faculty Survey of Student Engagement. And they would, is designed to allow for comparison of project institutions and for those to provide national results, those items in those large-scale surveys. The theory of change model that develops from this project will allow the broad and diverse range of institutional types and departments and disciplines to assess their readiness for research, scaffolded curricula, and provide key insights into the effects of such curricular transformation on student achievement and organizational and cultural change. So that was an example of a multi-institutional, a collaborative project that was focused on improving undergraduate STEM education. This third and the final example is one that was funded out of fiscal year 19, evaluating the potential of community college guided pathways reforms to increase undergraduate STEM student success. And this is an example of a research project that was funded out of a research center. So the project team partnered with higher education agencies in 3 states that are leading statewide community college guided pathways reforms, Ohio, Tennessee, and Washington State. The goals of the project are to evaluate how these guided pathways reforms are changing practices in STEM programs, advising, and other supports. What barriers and facilitators college and STEM program leaders face in implementing these reforms, what metrics colleges should use to formatively evaluate the effects of these reforms on STEM program effectiveness, and what relationship exists between guided pathways reforms and enrollment, early progress, and persistence in undergraduate STEM programs by community college students generally and by underrepresented students in particular. I don't want to read the entirety of this slide. This was a very nuanced research design. It was designed to inform college practices and public policy through the identification and validation of metrics. In this case, the project team sought to produce a practitioner's guide that includes metrics that for formative use to evaluate the effects of guided pathways reforms on STEM outcomes. The IUSE program, if you will, this is an example of perhaps translational research. That is, we're funding work, research that is designed to inform practices, both at the level of institutions, but also potentially at the policy level, that are focused on improving undergraduate STEM education. So again, these are 3 examples of projects. They're employing very different theories of change. They may be studying the change process themselves. And they're recognizing that this curricular change as it relates to undergraduate STEM education takes place in complex systems that are multifaceted. The examples that I gave you, the first one, I would describe it as taking place at the micro level at a single institution, and the other two multi-institutional projects were at the meso level. So with that, I'm going to pause and we'll have a question and answer period. So thank you for submitting the questions along the way. There was a question about providing an example of organizational change theory. I think that between the work cited in the first project, which was Austin's work, and Elrod and Kazar's work, the second and third funded projects were examples of people studying the change process. And that was also informed by the theories that they brought to bear. So I think that those three are good examples. Oh, good question. Should theories of change address both micro and meso levels? The theory of change should align with the goals and the purpose of the project that you're putting forward. That is to say, if your unit of analysis, or if the project is intended to take place at a single institution, that the theory of change or the theories of change that you cite should be specific to the components of that project that you would need to have in place for it to prove to be successful. That is to say, if we go all the way back to the Bowman and Deal example, if your project needs to take into account the human resources, that is, for example, professional development of individuals, as well as the politics of perhaps the landscape at one's home institution, that you would want to employ theories of change that would help you identify those components of your project that you would need to account for. So I hope that that makes sense. So don't feel as if you need to account for have theories of a change that account for both the micro and the meso level if the work that you're proposing, for example, might be a single institutional project and it's at a micro level. I hope that makes sense.
The next question focuses on faculty professional development and asks whether the faculty professional development really fits into the engaged student learning or the ICT track. The question itself as a whole, I should probably read it directly. It says, our team's idea for a proposal involves professional development for faculty. We were thinking of applying for the ICT track, but noticed that professional development was also listed in the ESL track. What would make one professional development proposal better for ESL versus the ICT track? I think that really depends on the project and what the intended outcomes are. If the faculty professional development is really aimed at improving student learning, it's probably better suited for the engaged student learning track. But if it's really focused more on the institutional change component and how to perhaps move faculty experiences or faculty directives across multiple disciplines, it might be better suited for the institutional and community transformation track. Again, depending on how you've situated it, if you've included a theory of change and have that as a framework for building your ideas, it really belongs in the ICT track, versus something in which case the faculty professional development efforts will be measured, for example, by measuring student learning or other student outcomes. That one might be better suited for the engaged student learning track.
We've got another question. Which track would be more appropriate if we wanted to change the culture of our program? More specifically, to focus on activities to engage underrepresented groups of students. Perhaps in keeping with what Ellen just said, I would look for the preponderance of the activities that you're going to be engaging in. So if the purpose of the project is to, it says focus on activities to engage underrepresented groups of students. If what you're developing are primarily student-facing materials, then engaged student learning might be a good track for that. Certainly professional development activities could apply for projects in either track. recognizing that at some level they're the flip side of the same coin. If, on the other hand, you are looking at institutional culture and you are primarily looking at things, for example, policies and procedures, faculty rewards, things like that. It may be more about the function of the institution, and so the institutional and community transformation track might be appropriate. I would suggest you're getting in touch with a program officer and talking through your project idea and to hone in on whether or not one track or the other would be a better fit.
And the next question asks, what track should you apply to if your goals fall between the two programs? That's another interesting question, and we do have some projects like that where you could really make it fit into either of the two tracks. Again, I think this is an opportunity to contact a program officer and to ask some questions about how they see the project as fitting in. The other option is to think about which track you really think it belongs into and to apply to that particular track. However, we at NSF do reserve the right to look at projects as proposed and to determine, even if they were, for example, submitted to the ICT track, if we think that they might be better suited to review in the Engaged Student Learning track, we have the option of moving them to that track. So your choice or your guess is a strong indicator as to which track they belong in, but we do reserve the right from our end to take a look at the proposals and see if we think if it might actually fit better into the other track.
Another good question. Are letters of support allowed from deans and provosts? I want to kind of come at this from two angles. One, the NSF used to encourage letters of support. That is a very specific term of art. And those were statements of enthusiasm for projects. That's not currently a helpful type of letter. A different term of art is letters of commitment. And those letters are intended for individuals who are named or implied in the 15-page narrative of your proposal. It's a statement that they will intend to carry out the duties as or responsibilities as articulated in the narrative. So a letter of commitment is very different from a letter of support. So just on that point. In terms of where those letters come from, it can be very powerful in ICT proposals to have letters of commitment from deans or provosts, particularly if their support is requisite for the project to be successful. So that's a really important point to think about.
I'll address one more question, and then maybe Andrea can take one more, and then we'll go back to the slides. The question that I'm going to read is, so it's okay to propose a new theory of change as long as you place it in the context of other theories of change. It certainly is. And again, this goes back to trying to figure out what the bridge is between what you see the problem is and how you propose to solve it, really thinking about what the elements are that will lead you from the problem to the solution. So if you have a new theory of change, that can be very useful. But again, framing it in what's known before and why you need a new theory of change would be very helpful in putting your proposal and your theory into the proper context.
Yes, absolutely. And I would also add to that in our solicitation, we specifically call out for replication studies, and as that might apply in the ICT track for examples in which there may be theories of change that have been developed, but they are understudied in the institutional context within which you're working. And so one way of strengthening an already strong proposal might be to both draw on a theory of change, but also pay attention to how you might study how change takes place at in your institutional context or in a multi-institutional project, and then be able to contribute to the literature about how that theory of change might need to be adapted to different contexts. So that could be an important contribution. Okay, so we're going to move on and talk a little bit about the different tracks and levels. As Ellen noted, in the Engaged Student Learning track, that is focused on increasing engagement and learning through new tools, resources, and models, and generating knowledge about student learning. That track has 3 levels. Less than and all the way up to $300,000 and a maximum duration of 3 years. Level 2 is $300,000 to $600,000 for the same maximum duration. And level 3, $600,000 to $2 million, but a maximum duration of potential duration of 5 years. In the ICT track, there is a new type of proposal that came about with this most recent solicitation, and we'll talk about it momentarily. We'll talk about all of these momentarily. Capacity building, a maximum potential budget of $150,000 for a single institution and up to $300,000 for multiple institutions. The capacity building track is intended to help position an institution to put together a competitive subsequent proposal. Then there's level 1, which, similar to Engaged Student Learning, has a maximum potential budget of up to $300,000 in duration of 3 years. And level 2, a maximum of up to $2 million for a single institution or $3 million for proposals coming from multiple institutions or research centers, and that has a maximum potential duration of 5 years. We have just around the corner on December 1st, 2020, and the first Tuesday in December thereafter is the upcoming deadline for level 2 and level 3 proposals. Level 1 and capacity building proposals have due dates separated by 6 months. So we have one coming up next February 2nd of 2021, and then in August 3rd of 2021 as well. So the institutional and community transformation capacity building proposals, as I said, have maximum potential budgets depending on the number of proposing institutions and duration of 2 years. They came about because we were thinking about ways in which we could diversify the number and types of institutions that are funded through the ICT track. So they're intended to enable institutions that have not served as lead institutions on a prior ICT award to identify a project of interest. Funding for these projects is intended to support efforts to assess institutional needs, to formulate departmental or institutional commitments, to develop necessary partnerships, to examine prior institutional efforts, gather data, learn about relevant theories of change. So if you're not well versed in theories of change, this is an opportunity to learn more about them, identify relevant institutional practices or policies, and formulate plans for advancing institutional or community transformation. You're encouraged to think about a variety of participants, so disciplinary or educational researchers, assessment and evaluation experts and advisors, and institutional leaders. The proposals are intended to defray costs such as coordinating amongst participants, sharing data, attending relevant meetings, including we have an IUSE PI meeting coming up. The time frame is intended to allow institutions to host one or more working meetings at which stakeholders and potential research partners might ultimately develop an ICT level 1 or a level 2 proposal. Initially, we conceptualized this as, before the pandemic, as an opportunity to do some initial planning, convene people, perhaps scholars that you would potentially be citing, or leaders in that research domain, and then based on a convening to develop a level 1 or a level 2 proposal. We have found that people in the field have been very creative about how to construe that capacity building, and we're certainly open to that kind of creativity. But it's really intended as a proposal type that will enable a greater number of institutions to have ICT awards. And again, it's for institutions who have not yet been a lead in an award and an ICT award. So level 1 proposal have a maximum award size, as I mentioned before, of $300,000 and duration of 3 years. These are intended for early stage exploratory projects or small to mid-scale projects that build on prior work. Those are the same deadlines that I mentioned earlier. Level 2 awards range from $300,000 or just over that to $2 million for a single institution and up to $3 million for collaborative projects from 2 or more institutions or from research centers that are studying phenomena of broad potential impact. The third example that I gave that was focused on guided pathways is an example of that latter category, work coming out of a research center. And the maximum potential duration is at 5 years. So these are intended to support design and development work or impact research. The projects at this scale and scope may be disciplinary, interdisciplinary, or multidisciplinary in nature and intended to examine and or incorporate broad communities of institutions, departments, or faculty. As you would guess, with these larger scale awards, projects are expected to demonstrate sufficient scale and scope to warrant funding at this level. If it's based on prior work, it need not have been funded through the IUSE program, but there should be sufficient data and documentation of expertise of the project team to support the project objectives. The ICT level 2 work, and actually all the IUSE funded work, is expected to contain robust research plans, including either significant research questions or large-scale evaluation efforts, along with appropriate assessment efforts. To determine suitability of a project for consideration as ICT level 2 effort or for assistance in distinguishing between level 2 and engaged student learning level 3 projects, you're encouraged to contact a program officer and to talk about the specifics of your project. So with that, we're going to pause again and field additional questions. Ellen, do you have any?
I'm just looking. Let's
okay.
see. If your proposal is at the capacity building level, how strongly should the theory of change claim be made, or is that part potentially of the capacity building development activity? As we covered a little bit, I think developing your theory of change can really be part of the capacity building activity. It's an opportunity to do some literature reviews, to consult with some experts, again, to perhaps convene a meeting in which you might invite some folks who've done some of this work to help you sort out what exactly a theory of change or whether their theory of change might best fit the type of environment that you are working in. So it's not critical that you have a theory of change. You could certainly have some ideas about ones that you might want to explore, but I think having one fixed and set in stone for the capacity building level is not critical for a capacity building proposal.
That's exactly right. And I would encourage you for the capacity building, instead of describing which theories of change you would adopt, describe how you would go about selecting a theory of change, and if you have candidate theories, to articulate what those are and what the process would be for your community to engage in that. Okay, the next question is, can you speak a bit on the issue of program sustainability? Much of the funding NSF provides will help to get a project started, but then institutions are left to continue them. How critical is that ongoing support to proposal success? It is, you're exactly right, that it's important to address sustainability issues. That the NSF has a sufficient amount of funding to fund projects that have the potential to generate new knowledge and to start things up, but not to support them in perpetuity. So it's depending on the nature of the project and the scope of the project, it can be quite critical to do that. And certainly with a capacity building proposal, that's not so much in play. But if you, for a level one, level 1, 2, or 2 proposal, sustainability is a really important thing to reflect on. You may not have to have a full-blown plan articulated for sustainability, especially if you are seeking funding to stand up a new program or do experimental work, which is often the case. But demonstrating that you've thought about sustainability can be very helpful.
The next question is an educational researcher as co-PI required for the ICT track? The answer to that is really the composition of the project team is entirely up to the proposers. So if you think that you need an educational researcher and it would benefit your project, then you are certainly welcome to include one on the team. If you think that the project can be done without an educational researcher and doesn't need that level of expertise, you are also welcome to structure a team that would address the questions that you're trying to ask. We have no requirements for what the PI team composition is in the IUSE program. So again, you're free to choose the best people for the job that you'd like to do.
Absolutely. Is it required or recommended for an institution to apply for a level 1 project before a level 2 project? No, it is not required. Certainly, if you have done prior work or you feel like you're in a position to submit a level 2 project proposal, by all means, go ahead and do that. It can be helpful, but certainly if you have done prior work that has been supported by the institution or other outside entities, you need not have an ICT level 1 proposal funded before you apply for level 2.
And the next question is, so capacity building is not allowed if the university has ever had an ICT award. The answer to that is yes. Institutions that have already shown the capacity to develop an ICT proposal probably don't need support from the capacity building track. Unfortunately, this also means that a new investigator to the institution would be disqualified from submitting an ICT proposal, even if they had never held one or had never served as a PI on a proposal like that. But as long as the institution has already been awarded an ICT award, then they are no longer qualified for the capacity building track.
And that's exactly right. I think the only qualifier is that we have, if the institution is a lead institution in a prior institutional and community transformation award, that's disqualifying. So if, for example, an institution has had a sub-award or something along those lines, there's still a possibility. But
that's true. They could also serve as a collaborating partner. If the lead institution has not had an ICT award, but a collaborating institution has, that's okay.
Yeah. If a collaborative research ICT project has a total of nearly 3 million, can or should more than 2 million be housed at the lead institution? Does it reflect poorly on the collaboration if the non-lead institutions have significantly smaller budgets? I think that the configuration of the budget really needs to be right-sized to the project. Sometimes the structure of your project, in which you've signaled already that it would be collaborative, is a signal to reviewers about the decision-making processes that might unfold within the course of a project. It's important that you have the latitude to carry out the work. After an award is made, it is tremendously difficult to transfer funds from one institution to another. And so reviewers and NSF staff really look to the structure of the proposed budget to make sure that it aligns with the goals of the project. But we don't have a kind of a prescripted, we don't have expectations going into this about the allocations of the requested budgets from one collaborative institution to another.
Okay, maybe we'll take one more question before going back to the slide deck. The question is, what are recommendations regarding external evaluation versus using internal evaluation resources? The IUSE program doesn't require one or the other. We do require some sort of evaluation plan, or the evaluation plan is highly suggested for IUSE proposals. But how that plan is structured and who is actually performing the evaluation is, again, up to the project team. In some cases, it makes sense to use an external evaluator who has a substantial expertise in the field and can perhaps help guide the development of the research or evaluation questions, while in other cases, there is sufficient evaluation expertise even among members of the project team itself. And so they can serve in setting up their own evaluation plans and figuring out the strategy for the evaluation of the overall project. Okay, so I'd like to talk very briefly about the program expectations for the IUSE program as a whole. So the program has three major goals. So we want proposals and projects that are supported by the program to build knowledge about STEM teaching and learning at the undergraduate level. And again, this can take place in a variety of ways. We've talked about both the engaged student learning and the institutional community transformation tracks, but we hope that within those tracks and in the proposals supported in either of those mechanisms, that the ideas will develop novel, creative, and transformative approaches to undergraduate STEM teaching and learning. So creative and transformative are words that are often used at NSF, but that's really what we would like to do. We'd like to find projects that are going to really transform the field and help make STEM education better for everyone. We hope that IUSE projects will incorporate evidence-based practices in STEM teaching and learning for all undergraduates. And Andrea's talked a little bit about the idea of replication studies. So replication could certainly fall into this particular program goal, where we hope to adapt, improve, replicate, and include evidence-based practices in STEM teaching and learning. And again, these types of projects can fall both within the engaged student learning track or within the institutional and community transformation track. But the ultimate goal being of really incorporating those evidence-based practices and using them to help improve learning for undergraduates. And we also hope to build and understand systemic change in undergraduate STEM education by laying the groundwork for really sustained departmental, institution, or community transformation and improvement. And as I'm sure many of us are aware, transformation at the institutional level often moves at a glacial pace. So anything that NSF can do to help support and move that transformation along would be very much appreciated. And many of those projects, of course, would fall under the arm of the institutional and community transformation track. All IUSE proposals are expected to increase knowledge, and so this really is a critical element of the proposals that we fund. However, how this knowledge is gained can occur in a variety of fashions. You have the option of posing a set of research questions. It can be one or it can be several research questions, along with a strategy for answering those questions, or knowledge can be gained through evaluation of project activities, impacts, or outcomes. And evaluation is often something that classroom practitioners are very familiar with, so sometimes that may be an easier route to go if that's the familiar territory. But understanding that learning something from the projects really is important, and what that knowledge will be, and how to define what that knowledge will be and convey it to your reviewers, and then hopefully be able to disseminate your knowledge ultimately to the STEM education community as a whole when your project is completed. We expect that projects will include some methods of getting this knowledge and analyzing the data that's gathered. So an important thing to consider is whether the research and evaluation methods are well aligned with the questions that are posed. Is what you're going to use to study this data really the best mechanism in which to do that? So it's really important to think about the appropriate methods to perform the study. And these can take a variety of flavors. They can be qualitative, they can be quantitative, or they can be a mixture of both. I think the important thing within the proposal is really, though, to justify why the particular method that you've chosen is the appropriate method of choice for understanding and analyzing the data that's being gathered. And that was a short section, but we'll take a few more questions at this point.
The first question it says, I'm not clear from the program solicitation on page limits for the different areas of the proposal. How can I get clarification on page limits for each section? The the base document that you want to be working for is what we call, and there's a link to it in the next segment of this proposal, the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, the PAPPG. And that enumerates all of the elements of the proposals, NSF-wide. And when you look at solicitations that are specific to programs, what you'll see there are elements where if there's a deviation from the PAPPG guidelines, that's what is articulated specifically in the program solicitation. So you want to be working both from the IUSE program solicitation and the PAPPG. And in a nutshell, you have in your project narrative 15 pages to work with, but we're not telling you how to break up those 15 pages and how you should allocate those.
Next question is, does the budget allow for leasing or renting of space? That would be entirely dependent on the question that's being asked and the project that's being proposed. If a particular type of space is needed, for example, research space or something that's going to encourage undergraduates to participate in research, that might be an appropriate use of some financial dollars to rent that space as needed. However, if it's going to be general purpose space or a classroom or extra space for the research or activities themselves, that might not be so appropriate. That might be thought of as institutional infrastructure that should be provided in support of the project.
The next question is, how are capacity building projects being evaluated? That's a great question. First, across all of the NSF proposals, we are looking, regardless of program, at intellectual merits and broader impacts. In terms of capacity building projects in particular, and intellectual merit and broader impact are described in the PAPPG. In terms specifically of the capacity building projects being evaluated, I would expect to see a justification and a description of why the topical area, why the problem that has been identified or the opportunity that's been identified is relevant to undergraduate STEM education and important in that particular institutional context. It's important to also articulate what are, in the prior slides, when we're identifying members of teams that would be involved in this, the kind of activities that you're proposing to undertake in the up to 2-year period of time. It need not be 2 years, it could be shorter than that, but what activities do you want to undertake? What literature are you thinking about incorporating, and what kinds of questions are you posing, and what activities will enable you to answer those questions? And do those activities and those questions have the promise of putting you in a position at the end of the project to submit a successful or develop a successful level 1 or level 2 ICT proposal at the end of it?
Next question is, if there are 3 to 4 multiple institutions, can it be part of a level 1 ICT? The answer is absolutely. There is no limit on the number of institutions that can be collaborating partners. And I can certainly tell you from personal experience, we have several projects in our portfolio that are up to 9-way collaborations with 9 different institutions participating. So as long as the project team is able to manage the number of institutions, and there's justification for all those institutions being part of the project, then it's perfectly appropriate to have multiple collaborating partners.
So here's a question that about the capacity building grants, and just to kind of clarify our prior statements. And it says, I understood that an institution that had an ICT award for any reason cannot apply for another capacity building grant. I thought I also heard that an institution that had an ICT cannot apply for another ICT even as another collaborative multi-institutional proposal. Did I mishear? And just to make sure it's crystal clear, if an institution has gotten an ICT award and was either it was a single institution award, or if the institution was the lead on a prior collaborative award from the ICT track, then that institution is not eligible for another ICT award, regardless if the PI putting that forward was a part of the prior efforts or not. So that's specific to the capacity building proposals. Outside of the capacity building proposal type, an institution can have multiple ICT awards. So that restriction is specific to the capacity building type of proposals because those are intended to position an institution so that they can make prepare a subsequent proposal, a competitive proposal to the ICT track. I hope that makes sense.
Maybe the last question for this section. If you are proposing enhanced faculty professional development on a national scale, must you have a team of faculty members as participants? I'm going to turn that one around and ask you to think about that type of question from a reviewer's perspective. If a reviewer were reading a proposal and in which a large team, national team of faculty were proposed, I'm guessing that they would probably want to see evidence that that team is actually in existence. So to have the team in place, whether they serve as participants, whether they serve as co-PIs, whether they have provided letters of collaboration, I think some indication that the faculty have bought into the idea and are willing to participate in the project as proposed is probably going to be important for the review panel to view that as a viable project.
And that question kind of signals at in the direction of community transformation. So the examples that we've given in this webinar to date have largely focused on institutional transformation or transformation across institutions. I just want to make clear that when we're referring to community transformation, that may refer to disciplinary societies. And so we funded a lot of work along those lines as well. So this question was about professional development on a national scale. We funded projects of that nature that have been specific to disciplinary societies. That's not to say that's the only way in which that might manifest itself, but I just wanted to make sure that what we mean by community transformation was addressed at some point. Thank you very much for those great questions. We wanted to wind up by leaving you with a series of resources. The IUSE EHR program webpage, you have a link here. The program solicitation is 19-601. And as I mentioned earlier, you can conduct a search of previously funded ICT or IUSE in general awards. Again, the program element code is 1998 for that. You're also welcome to contact program officers. The name and contact information for the program officers working with the IUSE program are on our program webpage, and disciplinary areas of affinity are mentioned there too. Earlier on, we made mention of the PAPPG, the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. Again, this is an NSF-wide resource that provides you the ground rules for successfully developing proposals and carrying out the responsibilities associated with NSF awards. Other resources that you might find useful are the Common Guidelines for Educational Research and Development. There's a NSF Merit Review Overview to give you a sense of what our merit review process is like. Merit Review refers to the process that we use once proposals come in. We put together panels of experts, and that's the process through which the proposals are reviewed. The art and science of reviewing proposals is actually very helpful. It's approximately 20-minute video, and it addresses issues including implicit bias. Another helpful resource, we have capacity building in STEM educational research, that is the Bixer Solicitation, and this is a program that is about creating resources for scholarly communities engaging in educational research, and that's through the EHR Core Research Program. So with that, we want to thank you for your participation in today's webinar. We've had fabulous questions, and we want to give you all a chance, one more chance to pose any last questions that you have. So we'll pause here for a moment to see if any additional questions come in.
I was just going to point out that actually on the prior slide it said we would spend some time talking about those who are specifically new to the IUSE program. We're actually going to forego that in this webinar, but we have several webinars that are archived on the AAAS website that contain a set of slides specifically geared for those folks who are new to the IUSE program or new to NSF as a whole that might provide some useful information about how to prepare a proposal, what the submission process is actually like, and what happens in the proposal review process from the Division of Undergraduate Education perspective.
Okay, so first question that came in is, for resubmissions, shall we assume the proposal will be assigned to the same cognizant program officer? I realize that there will be different reviewers. It is not, you shouldn't assume that you will have the same cognizant program officer. We go through a process of developing panels to review proposals that are in response to the type and number of the proposals that come in. And the program officer assignment to that may not be the same and is in response to the way that we panel the proposals that come in. Ellen, it looks like we... Oh, sorry, there was another one after all. Okay.
I was just going to say, yes, there's a question about when this webinar will be posted and where. All of you, I believe, have a resource button as part of your webcast interface today, and that resource button actually includes some useful information. It includes a copy of the solicitation. It includes a link to an evaluation survey, which we're going to ask you to take at the end of this webinar. It will include a PDF version of the slides that are presented today, and within a couple of days, as soon as the recording is finalized, it will actually include the full recording of the webinar. So you can access it through the resource button. You can also access it through the AAAS website. It's AAAS-IUSE.org, and all of that information will be there, and you can certainly refer back to this webinar as well as to others in this series at your leisure.
So with that, we want to thank you for the time that you've spent with us today and for your interest in the IUSE program.
Yes, thank you very much.